My son-in-law laughed and said in front of everyone, "Old loser." So I gave a slight smile, and the next day he no longer had a house. Before we continue, subscribe to the channel and let us know where you're listening from in the comments. I never thought of myself as old-fashioned, just well-built like the railway bridges I spent 40 years designing. Still, on that June evening, sitting at the head of the dining table in Cedar Creek, Ohio, I realized the walnut wood beneath my elbows was younger than the patience I was holding on to. Emily, glowing in a sea blue dress and just weeks away from giving birth to twins, was setting the silverware I'd once bought at a school fundraiser. The smell of roasted turkey mingled with the sweet scent of 4 vanilla candles lined across the center of the table. Mark, my son-in-law, 30-something blazer as snug as his salesman's smile, was swirling a glass of red wine like he was testing a V8 engine. The sound of his glass clinking against another echoed beneath the vaulted ceiling, marking the moment the air started to simmer. He lifted his drink just to chin height, amber light from the chandelier catching the deep red in his glass, and spoke loud enough to drown out Billie Holiday, gently playing from a speaker near the fireplace. A toast to the father-in-law trying to keep up with the digital age, but still losing in modern life. So tell us, Robert, what's it like growing old and falling behind? His words hit like loose rivets popping from steel. Emily's fork froze halfway to her mouth. Her hand instinctively moved to her belly, protecting the twins, Noah and Grace, though I hadn't met them yet. Logan, Mark's teenage nephew, choked on his soda and coughed to cover a nervous laugh. Even the old pendulum clock on the wall, a gift from me, passed down since the 40s, seemed to hesitate for a beat. I sat upright, my back reminding me of every belt notch I'd had to tighten since Laura passed. I let the silence stretch, just enough to make it uncomfortable. Then I took a sip of wine, letting the dry bitterness scratch my throat. Inside, my heart beat calm and steady, just like the last time the doctor checked it. By the time I placed my glass back down on the tablecloth, the decision had already been made in my mind. "You want to know what losing really feels like?" I said softly, just loud enough to make them lean in. "Wait for the letter from the bank." That was my way of pulling the pin without dropping the grenade. If Mark had known how to read body language, he would have noticed the spark in my eyes, the same one I once saw in a welder, right before a scaffold gave way. "This isn't gonna hold," he'd said. And he was right. Little did Mark know, that letter was already sealed, stamped, and on its way. Overnight delivery, signature required. Emily blinked quickly, confused. Mark opened his mouth, but no response came out. I asked for the salt as if nothing had happened. In that split second, I could feel the tension wrap around his neck like a poorly tied tie. And after decades of calculating sheer stress, I know, structures don't fail in explosions. They fail in silence. I've never been one to burn bridges in public. I prefer to remove the foundation and let the concrete speak for itself. So I kept the dinner going. I asked about electric car sales at the dealership, complimented the turkey's crispy skin, even casually mentioned the exact cost of their new water heater, just under $3,000, also paid by me. Every casual remark was a quiet reminder. I knew the value of things, because more often than not, I'd been the one footing the bill. As the raspberry-topped cheesecake cooled on the table, I mentally reviewed every mortgage payment I'd made since the start of 2021, over 250 of them, always on the same day each month, no exceptions. Together, they added up to more than $70,000, all paid with steady discipline. I also remembered that first Sunday after Emily moved in, when Mark called me "Sir" and said he'd take better care of her than any banker would with interest. 3 years and dozens of little jokes later, the only thing left unpaid was a debt that had nothing to do with dollars. That insult at dinner wasn't some one-off moment. It was just the latest stress in a cable that had been tightening for years. First came the jokes about my analog watch. Vintage, he'd say, like the guy wearing it. Then the cracks about my old flip phone. Still my favorite because I like feeling keys beneath my thumb. One evening at a steakhouse, he mocked my skepticism toward NFTs in front of 6 of his buddies. "Offline grandpa doesn't get digital money," he laughed. I smiled on the outside, but inside, I was tallying up every little bit of dignity I'd lost. 25 cents here, 40 cents there, until the total moral deficit became too large to ignore. When Mark finally collected the glasses and took them to the sink, I noticed a slight tremor in his wrist. Emily gave me an apologetic look, but I nodded gently, as if to say, "It's okay, sweetheart. Some lessons have to be paid up front." I'll admit it, I felt a touch of pity, but I swallowed it with a sip of water. Justice isn't served with rage. It's measured in precision. Just before midnight, I stepped out of the duplex, technically still mine. The night air smelled of damp grass and cold gasoline. The neighbors never mow after dinner, but Mark? He liked to fire up the lawnmower early on Saturdays, convinced that engine noise somehow proved masculinity. I walked across the sidewalk to my old Silverado, unlocked the doors, and paused for one last glance at the house. The roof had just been redone. Every shingle, every sheet of insulation, even the anodized aluminum gutters. I had paid for all of it. And in just a few weeks, that roof would no longer be backed by my credit, but by the ego of the man who called me a loser. I drove slowly. No radio, just the hum of the engine and the road. A steady pace, maybe 35 miles an hour. State Route 256 rolled under the truck like an old construction site. Every mile ticked off another item on the plan I had already mapped out in my mind. First stop, Carla's law office just after sunrise. Then print the clause, 18B, about the right to substitute the payer in cases of serious embarrassment. Get 3 signatures, mine, hers, and the notary's. Then send it all via express courier to the bank with a copy addressed directly to Mark Thompson. By the time I got home, the scent of pine from my workshop wrapped around me like an old friend. I switched on the light, and there it was, the oak crib I'd been building for the twins. Smooth planks with a golden hue, rounded corners, sturdy rails. I ran my hand along the edges. I was building it so Noah and Grace wouldn't hurt themselves when they started to stand. I smiled. I don't build for people who deserve. I build for people who need. And that's exactly why arrogant men always fall. Before bed, I sat down at my walnut desk, opened the drawer, and pulled out the spiral-bound mortgage contract. The paper still smelled faintly of ink and glue. I flipped to page 42, reading word for word the clause most people never notice, until they need it. Moral humiliation of the guarantor justifies full transfer of responsibility to the secondary debtor. I'm an engineer, but those legal words felt more concrete than any pillar I ever designed. I picked up the fountain pen Emily had given me for Father's Day years ago. The nib slid across the paper like a hot knife through butter. The second hand on the desk clock ticked quietly, like a hammer driving down nails. I closed the folder, clipped it shut, and set the alarm for just after 6. The plan was in motion. Gravity would take care of the rest. As I turned off the light, I replayed that moment at dinner, the sharp crease in Mark's brow when he realized I wouldn't shout. I'd stay silent. That's when I understood. True shock isn't the thunderclap. It's the quiet hum before it. The stillness that makes the birds disappear and the air feel heavy. And it was in that hum that I fell asleep, knowing that by sunrise, every piece on the board would be in place. Lying there in the dark, I thought about the next steps, missed calls, unanswered texts, a single reply quoting a line of civil law, and then the panic, quiet at first, but growing like compound interest. I pictured his face when the bank explained that without my support, the interest rate would spike, that the payments would become impossible. It was a lesson no business school teaches. Disrespect carries interest, and it always comes due. Looking back always reminds me of inspecting an expansion joint on a bridge. You have to examine every inch to understand where the crack began. Before that disastrous dinner, before Emily even told me she was expecting twins, there were decades of small sacrifices that seemed like nothing at the time, but stacked up, they took more effort than building a suspension bridge. My name is Robert Hayes, certified civil engineer, but at home I simply answered to Dad. And after Laura passed away suddenly from a stroke in 2020, I became Emily's only anchor. She was 29 then, finishing her post-grad in marketing, earning just over $3,000 a month before taxes, enough to rent a small one-bedroom in Columbus, but nowhere near the future I had envisioned for her. I first met Mark Thompson on a warm afternoon in June. The dealership showroom smelled like new leather and waxed steel. He glided over in a charcoal gray blazer and shook my hand with the practiced firmness of someone who closes deals daily. "I treat my clients like family," he said, checking his reflection in the polished metal panels. Emily laughed. I heard the sales pitch in every syllable, but I kept an open mind. I'd been young and ambitious once too. Still, even ambition has limits. I'd learned that from calculating stress loads. Put too much weight on a single point, and the beam bends. Over the next few months, he started showing up on Sundays in a brand new hybrid sedan. Industry perks, he'd say. He brought flowers for Emily on his third visit, a bottle of Pinot Noir for me on the fifth, and by Christmas, a coffee table book on historic bridges that genuinely moved me. But even the gift came wrapped in self-promotion, a glossy business card tucked inside with gold trim, and the title, Mark Thompson Sales Virtuoso. I chuckled but kept the card. I have a habit of filing away the little things that might tell a story later. Laura always said I had a soft heart. Maybe she was right. 2 years after that first test drive, Emily called me crying. The promotion she'd been promised didn't come through. "Dad, if I keep paying rent forever, I'll never save enough for a down payment." I could practically smell the cinnamon bread she was baking, a Sunday tradition passed down from her mom. It took me 5 seconds to decide. I'd sell the fishing boat I hadn't used since Laura passed, cash out a savings certificate earning a modest 2.4%, and make sure my daughter had a roof over her head. All in, I gathered $48,000 and some change. It stung to see it leave my account, but it hurt less than the thought of Emily spending her life at the mercy of landlords. In January 2021, we toured neighborhoods until we found the townhouse in Reynoldsburg. Red brick sash windows, a breezy attic. It was listed just under $360, a bit overpriced for the market at the time, but doable if someone, me, took on a mortgage of about $277. I still remember the smell of fresh sawdust mixed with latex paint in the hallway. It brought me right back to construction sites in my 20s. I signed the paperwork that day, using the same fountain pen Emily had given me for Father's Day in 2019. Royal blue ink spread across the page like a physical promise of paternal love. The first 2 years in the new place were good. Mark would put on gardening gloves on Saturdays, pulling weeds while Emily watered the hydrangeas we planted together. Cold mornings brought French press coffee in pastel blue mugs, steam curling into the wooden porch ceiling, carrying laughter that made me forget all doubts. Only someone who's lost a spouse knows how sweet it is to hear their child laugh freely again. But every story has its cracks. Eventually, the small signs started to show, signs most people ignore. Like the time at a barbecue when Mark joked that my dress shoes smelled like meetings that should have been emails. Everyone laughed. So did I. But I filed it away. Then came the moment he insisted I try installing a crypto app on my old flip phone, just to prove it couldn't be done. "See? The world moves, Bob," he mocked, raising his IPA. Another time, he gave Emily a cashmere scarf and leaned in to whisper, "Cost more than your first car, father-in-law." Small jabs like hairline fractures in a concrete column, easy to miss, but dangerous over time. Meanwhile, I kept paying the mortgage, $2,100-something every single month, always submitted just after my morning coffee, brewed with precision and muscle memory. The earthy scent of Sumatra grounds rose with the steam, and my hand pressed submit with quiet devotion. It was my way of speaking to Laura. "Look, love, we're still taking care of her." The bank once offered to refinance, but I declined. I didn't want to extend the debt beyond 2034. I'd be 76 by then. In the fall of 2022, Emily told me she was pregnant. I was sanding down the frame of an old toddler swing, unfinished since 2018, when she appeared, glowing with joy. Sawdust stuck to my damp cheeks. Mark, I'll admit, seemed truly excited. He bought a fetal Doppler to hear the baby's heartbeats at home, installed smart lighting in the nursery, and promised to handle everything financially. I believed him. Because faith in someone's character is the cement that holds a family up. But soon after, the cracks stopped being verbal. Mark started going on about can't lose investments, celebrity tokens, pre-IPO stocks recommended by YouTubers with precision-trimmed beards. One rainy Sunday, he casually mentioned wiring $7,000 to a broker in Belize. 40% returns guaranteed. When I raised an eyebrow, he grinned and said, "Old money sleeps, smart money moves." Emily gave him a half-hearted eye roll, but stayed silent. Their credit card bills began growing like vines left unchecked. I didn't see how far it had gone until I received a state fine in the mail. $190-something for late registration on the orange Mustang Mark swore was his business card. The billing address, unfortunately, was still under my name. I paid it quietly but filed the receipt with a sticky note. First brick out of line. Then came more alerts, overdrafts, data overages, a surprise bill for patio furniture bought in installments. Each one chipped away at the layer of patience I had painted over our differences. Still, I kept building. After my back therapy sessions, I'd head to the garage and work on the crib. White oak from Vermont, $9 a board foot. Dovetail joints, rounded corners, 3 coats of baby-safe varnish. Every swing of the hammer took me back to Emily's first cries, when she fit in the crook of my arm. That workshop ritual kept me steady, because outside of it, the signs multiplied. Mark flashed a $1,200 smartwatch in group chats, posted stories on a rented speedboat, grind now, shine later, and dropped hints about launching a motivational consulting firm. Behind every slogan, I could feel the storm approaching. The real trigger wasn't financial. It came in a single word, dropped like a hammer on a load-bearing beam, the night of June 14th. You already know how Mark raised his glass and called me a loser. What I haven't told you yet is the exact weight of that word. It totaled every quiet debt, every moment of overlooked disrespect, and turned them into one giant, unpayable balance. That was the final crack, the one that makes the inspector shut down the bridge. That night on my way home, the sensory details of the last decade, vanilla candles, creaking new leather, the buzz of a lawnmower, no longer brought comfort. They read like data points in a structural failure report. I'd highlight them one by one when I reached my lawyer's office, and I did. By morning, I stood outside Carla's office in a graphite gray suit, navy folder in hand, waiting for the receptionist to unlock the door. 30 minutes later, my signature slid across the paper, not with hesitation, but with the clarity of someone who already knew how far the echo would carry. Bridges don't give warnings, they just fall. And I was already counting down. 3, 2, 1. On my way back, I drove past the dealership where Mark made his commissions. The glass storefronts reflected a flawless blue sky, but all I saw were red numbers blinking across invisible screens. It was all going to cost him, and not just in dollars. There was still time for him to swap high-tension steel for something softer. Gratitude, maybe. But I knew the truth. Some engineers only learn after the collapse. As I pulled into the driveway, my phone buzzed. First missed call from Mark. I exhaled, shut off the engine, and before opening the door, ran my hand over the freshly varnished top rail of the crib. "For you, Noah and Grace," I whispered. "Grandpa's got the foundation covered." What I didn't know then was how quickly the numbers would start to hurt. $7,000 here, $4,000 there. Each one, a painful payment in a much bigger lesson. But that's for the next chapter, the rise of injustice. And every story, like every bridge, needs to be told span by span. It was exactly here, in the quiet buildup, where the micro-humiliations began stacking up in real dollars. And that's when the anger, silent until now, finally started to boil. The first crack caused by that loser comment didn't take long to spread. Just 2 days after the dinner, Mark posted a photo on Instagram. Tight white shirt, toothpaste commercial smile, standing on a rented boat at Alum Creek Lake. The caption read, "Working hard? Nah, working smart." In the background, tucked into the corner, you could spot the leather case where he used to keep my old company credit cards. I assumed it was just a souvenir, until I discovered that same week he'd charged the boat rental to my address. Almost $500 quietly billed. "Because your old tax ID still works, Bob." More jabs followed, smaller, but far from innocent. By Tuesday, I got an email confirmation for a subscription to some quarterly craft beer club. Premium box, 60 cans of rum-aged IPA, nearly $85 a month, set to auto-renew. I called him. Mark just laughed. "Relax, Pops. We'll crack some open during the Super Bowl. You know, that one modern sport you still understand." I made a mental note and hung up. Wednesday came with another surprise. Over $300 in Uber VIP charges. He explained it like this. "High-end clients don't want you showing up smelling like a dealership. They want leather." There was no deal signed, no contract closed, but the receipt showed up in my mailbox, addressed to me, again, thanks to the outdated tax info tied to their home. I filed the statement in a brown folder labeled Micro Humiliations, right on page 3. That weekend, it went public. The twins' baby shower took place in a rented community hall, paid for by me. The hall alone had cost over $500, and there were balloon bears everywhere that added another $100 and change. Mark greeted the guests in a leather jacket that easily cost more than $1,000, introducing himself as an entrepreneur dad born on the blockchain. When my old college buddy George Whitmore complimented the decor, Mark burst out laughing. "All Emily's ideas," he said. "I just made sure the old man didn't handle the music, or it would have been all elevator jazz." The laughter was polite. I just kept refilling mini quiches, mentally adding another mark to the tally. Then came March, riding in with the smell of gasoline. Mark traded in the hybrid for a flashy orange Mustang GT. "Gotta match the truck buying energy," he said. "Down payment? Nothing. Financing? Technically mine again." He'd used the house title, still under my name, as collateral. A couple of days later, a ticket for misusing templates landed in my mailbox. Another $150 right in my lap. When I brought it up, he just sent back a laughing emoji. But the real blow came a week later. Emily called me crying. She was nearly 9 months along, and the shared credit card had been maxed out, well past $7,000. The breakdown? A high-end gaming chair that cost more than some used cars. A course promising to turn you into a millionaire in 90 days. And networking tools, which turned out to be a helicopter ride over Columbus, and 2 front-row tickets to a hip-hop concert. Emily had no idea. Mark told her, "Relax, babe. Credit card points turn into diaper cashback." When she apologized, I could hear her trying to hold in the sobs, more for her blood pressure than her pride. Even my quiet hours weren't safe anymore. Every Wednesday, I serve soup at St. Clair. Lately, Mark had started sending jokes to the family group chat right during my shift. GIFs of old men tripping over scooters captioned, "Bob training for the metaverse." The group laughed, some awkwardly. I read the messages, put my phone away, and kept ladling soup. But the meter inside me ticked higher. Then there was the bill no one mails, the cost of disrespecting Emily. She told me that while planning the nursery, Mark had mocked the oak furniture I was building by hand. "Pinterest is dead, babe. Our twins are going to be 5G. I still brought him a crib prototype. He tapped the wood, nodded politely, then posted a TikTok comparing my old-school workshop to a 3D printing startup. It got 16,000 likes. It didn't cost me $1, but every single click felt like a chisel to concrete. One Sunday evening, I finally added it all up, sitting at the kitchen table with the soft yellow light reflecting off my calculator. The total stared back at me, just under $15,000. Enough to fix the roof of the church where I married Emily's mother, or to subscribe to the local paper for half a lifetime. But it wasn't just the money. It was that each cent came packaged with a grin that whispered, "You're irrelevant." April oozed in like thick oil. The expenses kept leaking. Mark started leaving wrinkled receipts all over the house, hundreds for drone accessories, a pricey co-working membership, and, unbelievably, a deposit for a motivational conference in Las Vegas, scheduled for 1 month after the twins were due. When Emily asked if it made sense to travel, he answered, "Millionaire minds don't take paternity leave." On Mother's Day, I took Emily to brunch, just to lift her spirits. The next table over, unaware I was even there, Mark was showing off a spreadsheet on his iPad to 2 buddies. "Old man's funding my equity," he said. "Best business model there is." I smiled tightly. When he noticed me, he froze, then tried to laugh it off. "Hey, Bob, remember that bridge in Kentucky that cracked? Engineering really flopped back then, huh?" I just said, "Cracks always start small." Then I dropped a $55 tip on the table and walked out. No way was the waiter going to pay for my son-in-law's bad manners. At that point, every missed call from him meant a new charge I hadn't approved. When I got a message from the bank warning that a purchase had been flagged, over $3,000 for a home theater projector so the twins could have a baby cinema experience, I blocked the card. That night, Mark showed up in my garage, flustered. "I had to impress investors," he said. I pointed to the half-finished crib behind me. "Real investors will be crying in here soon," I said. "Start with them." He told me I didn't understand exponential growth. I didn't argue. My numbers were simpler: respect or the lack of it. By then, the running total of micro-humiliations had passed 19,000. I wrote the number on a whiteboard in my workshop and left it there, visible, when Mark came by to pick up a toolbox he'd never return. He raised an eyebrow. I just nodded. "Provisional balance," I said. I didn't tell him the emotional overdraft had long exceeded the page. Then came the final spark. The bank sent a notification. The mortgage rate would spike to nearly 9% unless me, the guarantor, submitted fresh income documents. My stomach dropped. Not with fear, but with clarity. It was time to stop reinforcing and start demolishing. That same night I sat at my bench, lit by a single warm bulb. I brushed away the sawdust, opened the dark blue folder, and flipped to page 42. Clause 18B had been sleeping there, waiting for this. I took the pen in hand, pressed it down hard, like a pile driver striking earth. The ink spread bold and steady. Right then, I heard the faint tap of rain outside, the kind of sound that comes just before the downpour. I closed the folder, breathed deep, and felt something massive shift in the foundation of our relationship. The workshop clock ticked into the early hours of the morning. I placed the folder in the back of my Silverado, already gassed up and ready to head to my lawyer's office with the first light of day. Each step across the sawdust-covered floor left a mark, just like the one I was about to leave on Mark's financial record. And right then, with the scent of damp pine still lingering, I finally understood. The weight of injustice had reached critical mass, and the scale was about to tip. The sun hadn't yet reached the tops of the maple trees when I parked outside the brick building where Carla Dawson kept her office. The hallway still smelled of fresh varnish. Carla had swapped out the linoleum for German oak, almost $19 a square foot by her count, but the receptionist hadn't changed. Donna, hair pulled into a tight bun, peppermint tea steaming in her mug. She unlocked the door before I even reached for the bell. "Right on time as always, Mr. Hayes. Gravity doesn't wait, Donna, and neither do builders." Carla appeared in the doorway wearing a petrol blue blazer and flats. Most of the time, she was a lawyer for developers, but for me, she kept a dose of fatherly fire. On her desk, neatly arranged in a triangle, were 3 stacks of paper. The mortgage deed with my name underlined in blue. Addendum 18B typed on letterhead, transferring full responsibility to secondary co-borrower, Mark Everett Thompson, effective the 1st of July. A formal notice addressed to both the bank and Mark, citing severe moral duress as the contractual trigger. Carla raised an eyebrow as I pulled from my pocket the fountain pen Emily had given me. "You sure about this?" she asked, voice soft, but edged with steel. I nodded. The ink flowed smoothly. When I was done, 3 blue signatures gleamed like fresh bolts on a steel beam. She stapled a check for her fee, never one for round numbers, then called the courier. I watched him seal the envelope, slap on the overnight priority label, tear the tape, and shoot me a thumbs up before the elevator doors closed. It sounded like the final clack of a drawbridge locking shut. Back in the Silverado, engine still warm, I turned on the radio. Jazz came through the speakers, but I switched it off after just a few notes. Silence made it easier to hear the sound of my own resolve. I stopped by Maple Diner, scrambled eggs, wheat toast, black coffee. Just under $9. I'd later log it under celebration expense. While I ate, my phone buzzed. Mark work flashed on the screen. I ignored it. First time, then the second, and the third. I needed the panic to simmer. Not long after 1 p.m, the phone buzzed again. 6th time. Bob, for the love of God, what's this message from the bank? They're saying all the payments are under my name now. It means exactly what it says, I replied, gently blowing on a spoonful of tomato soup. You can't do this. Oh, but I can. Freedom of contract, Article 421, pull up a PDF and check. I took a sip, paused. And congratulations on the twins, Mark. Have a good afternoon. I ended the call before the yelling could begin. Back in the workshop, the scent of cedar and mineral oil framed the rhythm of my piece. I set the planer blade against the crib's crossbeam and slid it slowly across. The even vibration told me everything was square, rare for living wood. My phone lit up again. Missed calls, desperate messages. Need to talk. If this is about the boat, we can work it out. I answered none of them. Silence is the most frightening echo. By late afternoon, golden light poured through the high windows. I heard a car pull up, quick footsteps on gravel. Emily appeared in the doorway, oversized sweatshirt, hands cradling her belly. Her eyes were red. Dad, I can't take it anymore. He's spiraling. Says he'll lose his job if his credit score drops. The manager called 3 times today. Her voice broke into a sob. I set aside the chisel and offered her Laura's old rocking chair. When she sat down, the cushion exhaled softly, as if welcoming more than just her weight. I passed her a glass of water on a folded linen napkin. Calmly, like a teacher at a chalkboard, I began, "Sweetheart, I'd never let you or my grandkids end up out on the street, so we've got 2 options." I explained Plan A. Mark signs a release. Emily and I refinance the house, she owns it. I cover 40%, she takes 60%. Or Plan B. I stay quiet. I don't file for eviction, but I stop paying. The bank goes after Mark directly. They'll decide what happens. Emily cried slowly, her shoulders trembling like a suspension bridge under heavy wind. Then she looked up. "I want to save our family, but not at any cost. Can we talk to him?" "We can," I said, "but only if he comes with empty hands and an open heart." She stayed a little while longer, fingertips brushing the freshly waxed banister. Before leaving, she kissed my forehead, just like when she was small. The gate closed behind her sometime just after 7. I looked at the blue folder on the bench. For a moment, I thought about putting it away. I didn't. It needed to stay out in the open, to remind me there was still a structure of morality I had to build. That night, Mark didn't come, but it felt like the whole city could hear the sound of him financially drowning. Before midnight, I got a text from First Federal confirming the co-borrower had 2 weeks to update his income records or face a sharp increase in interest. I gave a tired smile. Bank systems don't understand pride, just numbers. The hours passed like beams under pressure, creaking but holding. I barely slept, woke before sunrise, drank black coffee, checked the calendar. Just 6 weeks until the twins would arrive. I closed my eyes and prayed, didn't know to whom, that none of this would touch Noah and Grace. In engineering, we call that a safety factor. In family, it's called prayer. Mid-morning on the second day, Mark finally showed up in person. He honked twice, blocking the driveway with his car. Sweatpants, deep shadows under his eyes. I gave him a few minutes to knock. When he did, his face looked like he'd spent the night doing math with money he didn't have. "Bob, I was drunk when I said those things. You know, I respect He paused, realizing the contradiction. Okay, not enough, but I can't pay this interest rate alone. Can we renegotiate? I waved him in, carefully adjusted the planer blade. I'm not sure you've learned the lesson yet, Mark, but I love my daughter. Let's talk terms. He sat on the stool, hands clasped like a student awaiting a suspension. The sour smell of stress filled the air. I outlined the terms, writing each one on the whiteboard. Weekly couples therapy until the counselor says otherwise. He splits the cost with Emily. A 40-hour certified financial education course. Community service at St. Clair every Wednesday for 8 straight weeks. Miss 1. The clock resets. A full dinner cooked by him. No chefs, no help for Emily and me before the twins arrive. As I wrote, I saw veins bulge on his hands. But he said nothing. I signed at the bottom, handed him the pen. Mark hesitated, maybe eyeing an escape, but eventually scribbled his name. The deal was real. Miss any part of it and the bank takes over. It's your call, I said, wiping the board clean. Mark nodded, eyes glistening. No apologies were spoken, but something, a beam deep inside, felt like it had finally aligned. He left without a word. When the Mustang roared, it didn't sound like victory. It groaned like a dry gear grinding forward. I closed the door, breathed deep. For the first time in weeks, the weight shifted, off my back onto his, where it always belonged. The next day, I got a notification. Mark had signed up for soup kitchen duty. That evening, an email from Money Sense Academy confirmed his enrollment. Payment split into 3, small bricks clicking into place. I tracked each one from afar on a simple spreadsheet. Green for done, red for failed. 3 greens in a row. The moral debt was being paid down. Emily called. She said Mark was talking less, listening more. I wanted to believe her. She sounded lighter. That was enough for me to sand away another layer of bitterness, like fine paper over tender wood. By the 4th week, the bank called me offering contract harmony solutions. I said no. Send them to him. This time, he's the one who has to negotiate. On the other end, professional silence. Then, understood, Mr. Hayes. They understood nothing, and that was fine. The days passed like well-measured beams. No new creaks. We marked off the calendar, red X by red X. The night before the twins were due, only 2 clauses were left. I was about to sit in on Mark's final finance class when I looked at the crib, finally complete. The wood gleamed. Every joint was solid. I ran my hand along it and felt the same vow Laura and I once made, to protect. And that's when a thought took root. If Mark followed through with everything, I'd break my silence. Not to excuse him, but to testify. A public lesson set in stone. I began drafting a piece for the Cedar Gazette. Family repair and the mathematics of respect. Just an outline. But the headline pulsed in my mind. The gears were locked. The counterweight was set. All that remained was to pull the lever and choose, expose his pride or let him rebuild under gentler lights. The stage would be chosen soon. That night I closed the notebook with that decision half-written, knowing full well the next move wasn't mine, it was his. And when the clock hit midnight, I felt it in my chest. The chapter of relief had ended. The one of public reckoning was just about to begin. Up to that point, I'd acted like the kind of engineer who reinforces a cracked column quietly, recalculating loads, slipping in extra support, redistributing the weight. But now came the phase where scaffolding lights up, reporters get called, and bright yellow banners are draped across the structure with big bold letters, danger of collapse. If Mark needed to feel the weight of public attention in order to finally grasp how thin the line is between arrogance and ruin, then I would make sure every spotlight was aimed straight at him. I started with St. Clair, the senior home where he volunteered on Wednesdays, something I'd call a moral obligation, not a personal choice. I asked the director, Mr. McAllister, for permission to film a short video of the volunteers. Just for the winter donation drive, I said. I captured exactly 60 seconds of Mark, wearing a disposable apron, sweat running down from under his Virgo Ohio Motors cap, ladling soup with a shaky hand. The camera caught it all. Even the drop sliding down over the tattoo on his wrist that read, "Hustle." I sent the footage to the Cedar Gazette along with a short write-up titled, "From Sales Star to Soup Server: One Son-in-Law's Journey into Moral Interest Rates." The editor, a longtime Rotary friend of mine, grinned as he read it. "Oh, this one's going to get clicks, Bob." The piece ran as a double spread that Sunday. The headline, printed in bold serif letters, read, "When Pride Weighs More Than the Mortgage, a Lesson in Humility from Cedar Creek." They used only initials, but anyone in town could connect the dots. There aren't many orange sports cars parked outside retirement homes. The article described Mr. T as a former top salesman who had to recalculate his route after family tensions. I included the figures: almost 19,000 in extravagances, a few thousand in legal fees, and a mortgage rate nearing 9% hanging in the balance. And yes, I made sure to include the word that had started it all: loser. That morning, I laid the paper open on the table at Maple Diner and ordered pancakes. Maybe 15 minutes later, Mark walked in for coffee, face crumpled, hair wild, eyes sunken like tired bridge arches. I'd placed the newspaper just right. He stopped 2 steps away, read the headline, and looked at me, his face a mixture of anger, embarrassment, and something new. A hint of respect. You gave that to the paper?" His voice was shaky. "I gave them the facts," I replied. "The paper wrote the story. Any good engineer knows if you don't supply the right numbers, someone else will build the wrong version." He opened his mouth, but the waiter arrived with the check. I paid mine, stood, and tapped his shoulder. "There are more people who need to see you in action. Good luck this afternoon." That afternoon, Mark had the final session of his Money Sense course, the one titled Managing Personal Crisis. I knew the speaker, Professor Miller, sharp as ever despite his age. I gave him a quick call. "Tell the class a real story. The student you need is sitting in the front row." Miller chuckled. Nothing teaches faster than a mirror. Later on, people told me what happened. During the seminar, Mark was called up to the board to work out, on a giant flip chart, how many extra hours of car sales he'd need to cover the added mortgage interest if he failed to renegotiate. He picked up the red marker, wrote the number, and then just stared at it like someone looking over the edge of a high-rise without a railing. Around 15 people sat watching. Murmurs spread. Phones came out. That evening, a clip landed on TikTok with the hashtag Humble Math. By the next day, it had passed 50,000 views. Full public spectacle. The whole town and a good chunk of the state watched Mark's pedestal fall in real time. Meanwhile, Emily, 9 months pregnant and close to delivery, was finally breathing easier. Her therapist's reports were growing more hopeful. "Client now recognizes narcissistic behavior," one read. I marked it green in my notebook and wrote, "Okay." But we still needed the final test, the dinner Mark had promised to cook. He picked Saturday night, just a week and a half before the due date. Enough time, I figured, for the lesson to sink in before Noah and Grace arrived. When Saturday came, the house smelled of bechamel sauce. Mark was trying his hand at homemade lasagna. The table was set with pale blue porcelain and plain glass cups. No flash, no show. He wore a white apron with the words, "Sous Chef Dad," stitched into the front. He served the plates silently, hands only slightly unsteady. At the 4th empty seat, he placed an untouched plate. "For Laura," he told Emily, nodding toward the memory of my late wife. That hit harder than any apology. During the meal, he spoke little, listened more, and didn't crack a single joke. When we finished, he cleared the table, washed the dishes, and returned with a brown envelope. "This is the certificate from the course," he said. "A signed extension for 6 more months of community service, and a formal offer to split the mortgage, 70-30 starting in January. I'll cover the larger share." I signed with a steady hand. Emily shed quiet tears. It felt like a resolution. But I knew the story still needed one final chapter, the public one, and I had already written it. On Monday, I pulled into the Gazette with a new dossier. Photos of Mark delivering meals at St. Clair, filling out household budgets, planting seedlings in the garden during Senior's Day. Proposed headline, From Shame to Service, Chapter 2 in the son-in-law's redemption arc. The editor loved it. Uplifting, full circle, clicks and tears. Perfect. He invited us both to speak live on the affiliate radio station. The interview aired a few days later. We sat in a mustard-colored studio, a big mic hovering just inches from our mouths. The host asked Mark to describe the turning point. He took a deep breath, swallowed hard. I could see his throat shift, and finally said, "Live on air." I disrespected the man who gave me a roof. The bill came due. I didn't have moral credit, so I paid in humility. If this stops even one person from making the same mistake, the embarrassment was worth it. As he spoke, my phone buzzed. Messages from old colleagues. Brilliant, Bob. Didn't know poetic justice could be a class in financial psychology. I replied with a simple thumbs-up emoji. Quiet satisfaction, but sweet. This was full exposure. No tabloid could have humiliated him more than Mark did himself. By choice. Was he a villain revealed? Sure. But to preserve his humanity, I let him narrate his own redemption. After the interview, we walked out to the parking lot. The air smelled like rain. Dark clouds loomed over Reynoldsburg. Mark reached out his hand. Thank you for not giving up on me, even when I probably deserved it. I shook it. Didn't say, "You're welcome." I said, "Those hands will be holding 2 babies soon. Keep them clean." Less than 2 days later, in the quiet hours before sunrise, Emily went into labor. Mark was still doing his evening shift at St. Clair, elbow deep in pots and pans, when a volunteer grabbed his arm. "Your phone's blowing up, man. Better run." He bolted, left the apron behind, showed up at the hospital still wearing a t-shirt stained with soup. I was already there, with the freshly polished crib in the back of my Silverado. Every rail cushioned with foam. The hallways smelled like disinfectant and burnt coffee. As Emily's contractions picked up, I sat beside Mark in a row of gray plastic chairs. He was rubbing his hands over and over again, like he already understood. There'd be no more applause now. Only 2 tiny pairs of eyes watching his every move. He turned to me. "Mr. Hayes, can I make a promise? Right here, no edits, no filters?" I nodded. "I'm going to teach Noah and Grace that gratitude is a debt, and that it comes due every month, whether there's a bill or not." Before I could answer, the delivery room light switched green. A nurse called his full name, Mark Everett Thompson, just like in Clause 18B. And we both stood. He walked in first. I stayed behind, hands in my pockets, listening. There were cries, then silence. Then the soft sound of 2 newborn voices overlapping like music. The births came just a minute apart, but in that single minute, a whole world changed. A little later, Mark emerged, cradling both babies in striped blankets. Emily smiled from the hospital bed, tired but radiant. He handed me one of the twins. "Here's your first dividend, Grandpa." The tiny cry warmed my chest like sun through old pine. I felt every part of me click into place, like a structure finally complete. The weeks that followed blurred into diapers, feedings, and fulfilled promises. But in that hallway, I realized something. The public exposure hadn't just humbled him. It had built him a stage, one he couldn't walk off without shame. Now, the real loser would be the one who broke the new promise. And there were cameras, some real, some metaphorical, watching from every angle. The moral engineering was nearly complete. All that remained was to write the epilogue, toast to the freedom earned, and draw the final boundaries. The next step would belong to both of us, at a bigger table, with the children close by, as living bricks of everything we'd built. I wish I could say that after the twins were born, life started gliding forward like fresh oil through the gears of a Swiss watch. But it didn't. The real renovation began when Noah and Grace came home, taking over the same room that, just a few months earlier, had smelled of fresh paint and oversized dreams. The nights became a cycle of alternating cries, warm bottles kept at body temperature, and the hum of a white noise app Mark downloaded to optimize the twins' REM sleep. I'd shuffle around in my flannel pajamas with a thermos of coffee and a notepad where I tracked every ounce of formula. An old engineer's habit. What you measure improves. That first month, I watched Mark check off every task on our whiteboard like he was managing a critical path schedule. Wednesdays at St. Clair were no longer a duty. He started showing up early to stack supply boxes, and on Saturdays, he'd strap Noah into a front carrier while handing out hot cocoa to the residents. Mr. McAllister, the director, chuckled when he told me, "The Mustang guy's become our poster boy for punctuality." When I asked Mark if it was all just reputation management, he lifted his soup-stained apron and said, "Out there, image might matter, but in here, reputation doesn't buy you anything. I do it because it keeps me straight." Emily, meanwhile, bloomed into motherhood. Therapy had taught her to trim back unrealistic expectations and nurture healthy boundaries. One rainy Sunday, I sat on the couch and heard her tell Mark with a quiet but firm voice, "I don't need a hero. I need someone who shows up." Mark swallowed hard and replied, "Showing up starts with the next diaper." Then he picked up the box and changed Grace without flinching. Unthinkable behavior for a man who, not long ago, couldn't even take out the recycling without a fuss. Financially, for the first time in a long while, the numbers started to go down instead of up. Mark sold his smartwatch online for just under $800, closed out his crypto-like tokenized investments with a small loss, and funneled every penny into the twins' college fund. Every 2 weeks, he'd hand me printouts of the accounts like a kid showing off a report card. I'd check the balances, run projections with a transparent ruler, and return the sheets with pencil notes. Sometimes I'd joke about charging interest. Bring oatmeal cookies to the next meeting or face a 0.5% affection penalty. He always showed up with warm batches, never wanted to owe anyone in kindness. 3 months in, with the maple trees turning bright orange, we were invited to a follow-up meeting at the therapy clinic. Dr. Nance, the psychologist, presented a bar chart comparing his previous self-sabotaging behaviors to his current ones. The first bar, in red, looked like a skyscraper. The most recent, in green, barely nudged past the baseline. Mark didn't gloat. He nodded, misty-eyed, and said, "My new KPI is making sure that bar never rises without me noticing." We walked out into the chilly wind. He offered me his sweatshirt, but I waved it off. The warmth I felt wasn't from cotton. I made moves too. I sold the old boat I'd inherited from my brother, hadn't used it in years, and put every cent, just over 20 grand, into a pair of 529 education plans for the twins. My name's still listed as the account owner, but I added a detachable clause that hands control over to Mark once he makes 30 straight-on-time payments toward the mortgage. I didn't tell him. I plan to hand him those papers the day I catch him turning down anything flashy in favor of his children's future. Then came the twins' first Christmas. The duplex was lit with simple LEDs. No synchronized light show, no music blaring outside. Mark spent 2 days perfecting a dark beer turkey recipe. The skin turned out crisp, the meat juicy. When I sat at the table, I noticed he'd set out 3 crystal glasses and 2 plain ones. He explained, "The crystal is for those who carried us. The others are for me." I quietly switched the glasses before dinner began. He caught it, smiled, and raised his cup. "To the man who taught us that respect is concrete." Months passed. In spring, Mark asked to use my workshop. I walked in just in time to see him sanding a plank of cherry wood. He was building a dresser for the twins' clothes. He held the chisel like a beginner. Off-angle, too much pressure. Instead of correcting him, I handed him a strip of 220 grit sandpaper and said, "Softening takes patience. Hardwood responds better to a gentle hand." Right then, it hit me. My technical advice had always been disguised love letters, and Mark, somehow, had learned to read them without needing diagrams. Around May, St. Clair held a silent auction to raise funds. I suggested he donate the dresser if he could finish it in time. He worked through the nights between feedings and colic and turned in a smooth beeswax-finished piece. They tagged the opening bid at $400. It sold for over $1,200. Mark blinked. "That's more than my smartwatch was worth." I patted his shoulder and said, "Market value's all about purpose and story, and yours has grown." He posed for a photo holding the sold sign, and for the first time, his smile wasn't about pride. It was gratitude. pure and almost childlike. July arrived, the twins turned 1. Emily wanted a small backyard party, paper lanterns, homemade lemonade. Mark took charge of the menu, grilled chicken sliders, simple pasta salad, and carrot cake with cream cheese frosting. Nothing for Instagram, everything from the heart. Before serving, he wiped his hands on his apron and asked to say a few words. About 30 people were there. Neighbors, folks from the nursing home, a few dealership clients. He took a breath and looked my way. I want to thank the man who taught me that bridges don't collapse all at once. They fail when we ignore the tiny cracks of disrespect. Bob, thank you for cutting the rope when it mattered most. I promise not to patch it with tape, but with new steel. I didn't stand, I just replied, even new steel can rust without protection, keep it guarded. Light laughter, clinking glasses. Then I pulled 2 white envelopes from my pocket, sealed with blue ribbon. One went to Mark, the other to Emily. Inside were the education fund certificates and a handwritten note. Money is a tool. Character is the foundation. Take care of both, and nothing will crumble over Noah or Grace. Emily teared up. Mark bit his lip. The twins clapped without knowing why, but maybe, somehow, they felt the shift in the air. Something had closed right in front of them, like a door locking after a long journey. While everyone lined up for food, I sat beneath a poplar tree and let the warm Ohio breeze touch my face. I thought of Laura. I think she would have approved of every step, even the harsh ones, because love that doesn't protect its own integrity is just varnish on rotten wood. As the evening dimmed, Mark came over with 2 glasses of iced tea. He sat beside me, and for the first time didn't check his phone for more than 5 minutes. We listened to crickets. Emily's laugh floated over from across the yard. He sighed. I don't even know if I still deserve to call you father-in-law. The title hasn't changed, I said. It's just been reinforced. We chuckled. Then he looked toward the lit-up house and whispered, if I ever drift off again, point out the first crack. I tapped my glass gently against his. I'll point. You patch. No handshake, no paper contract, but sealed by a year of sweat and earned trust. When I said goodbye, Noah was asleep in his arms, and Grace nestled against Emily. I got into my Silverado and caught a glimpse of Mark in the rear view, carefully locking the gate and double-checking the latch. Safety isn't overkill for someone who's felt the ground shake, I thought. I started the engine. The radio was playing jazz, first time I'd turned up the volume in a while. No one in that house made fun of my taste anymore. I drove slowly through a street full of fireflies. At the last turn, peace settled over me, deeper than anything I'd felt since that first loser. That's when I knew. The real revenge wasn't the mortgage. It wasn't the headline. It was turning him into a man who could build with his own hands the emotional roof of his family. I only lent the level. He laid every brick. And as the night swallowed the last threads of daylight, I decided, if life gave me more years, I'd use each one to track not debts, but growth. Because well-tended pillars don't need constant threats, just steady care and watchful eyes. So with the odometer just past 74,000 miles and the smell of cedar still clinging to my shirt, I wrapped up a project I never thought I'd see completed. A bridge between failure and redemption, strong enough to carry 4 generations. I rolled the window up, let the jazz fill the cab, and smiled at the dark ahead, knowing that from now on none of us would be called a loser again. At least not without first checking the bolts in our own foundation. Subscribe to the channel and share your thoughts about the story in the comments. See you in the next one.